Location, the North American High Arctic. We have a long way to go to see the fossil forest which lies barely 600 miles short of the North Pole itself. Time, the endless Arctic summer day. Destination, following in the footsteps of previous explorers, we are headed for remote Axel Heiberg Island. Mission, to study the fossil forest millions of years old and only recently discovered by scientists. Our journey begins here, just south of the Arctic Circle, in the busy port of Iqaluit, or Frobisher Bay, as it's also known. This mushrooming town is on the edge of the industrial tide and could be swallowed by the energy-hungry South in its relentless quest for untapped resources. Cargo ships not only bring machinery and goods, but a whole new way of life to the native peoples. The first lap of our expedition up Baffin Bay brings us to Pond Inlet, one of the northernmost human settlements in the Arctic. The Arctic North, once a distant, unknown wilderness, a land bound up in legend and mystery, populated only by Eskimos, igloos, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, polar bears, and bearded, wild-eyed explorers, has in fact become an important part of the North American landscape. Government schools, set up in the 60s, grouped the children of the once nomadic Inuit in settlements like this one in Pond Inlet. Political cohesion and community awareness are only recent here. In 1921, HBC, the Hudson Bay Company, set up a post here, or here before Christ, as some Inuits say. Freshwater's great, thank you, but we'll keep on breeding our huskies just the same. Fortunately, sewage collection trucks, video rentals, and cable TV are not the only imports from the South. Other influences have been at work to help the Inuit retain their sense of place and identity. Anglican and Roman Catholic missions arrived in 1926. The missionaries were among the first to lead the fight to preserve Inuit culture. Because of their endeavors, there has been little illiteracy in the Arctic for decades. Using a syllabic alphabet introduced by the missionaries, most Inuit can read and write their mother tongue in Iqtitut. Perhaps, too, the message brought by the missionaries has helped to lighten the darker sides of Inuit life. Today, in spite of what is recognizably a southern element in their lifestyle, this particular Inuit community is highly self-sufficient. Its level of unemployment is lower than in many other Arctic communities because of lead and zinc mining and oil exploration in the high Arctic islands. Looking to the future, who knows if this child will grow up to ask the increasingly urgent question, who owns this land? And what a wild and wonderful land it is. To the north, it heaves, buckles, and soars into mountains with peaks a mile high on Violet Island. It all looks as though it's been there forever. In fact, if you look at it geologically, it was only born yesterday. The last ice age came 2 to 4 million years ago, changed the face of the Arctic, and formed the landscape as we see it today. About 10,000 years ago, a warming trend caused the ice to retreat, leaving in its wake a jumbled debris of boulders and gravel beds. In the south, forests soon covered the debris, but above the tree line, the Arctic remains a land with only a delicate mantle of sparse vegetation veiling its primitive nakedness. While it's true the Arctic is a desert with long, dark winters, gale-force winds, and little rain, it is far from being barren. Surprisingly enough, the tundra in summer is a riot of flowers. To survive, though, plants need to be tough as well as ingenious. Being tough means keeping out of the way. Like the Arctic willow, a favorite food for grazing musk oxen. It snuggles close to the ground to avoid the killing wind. Then there are the mosses, which live in partnership with the many species of lichens and form a soft carpet to walk on. Of course, where there's plant life, there's also bird life. Violet Island has one of the most diverse bird populations to be found north of 70 degrees latitude. The attraction is the adequate food supply and an abundance of suitable nesting sites. Most of these birds, as you'd expect, are migratory, like the brant goose, which breeds in the Arctic. They certainly get around. Different flocks of brant geese winter from British Columbia to Baja California. Others choose the coastline of Virginia and North Carolina. Still others head for Europe. How they and other birds find their way over such vast distances is still a mystery. But there's no mystery to the fact that living in the high Arctic means knowing how to survive. Plants, birds, animals, and humans all live under the same harsh law, extracting food and shelter from this ungenerous environment skillfully and tenaciously. The Inuit know that if they want to remain here, they must not let go of their traditional skills. That's why the people of Pond Inlet keep up their summer hunting and fishing camp routines. The South may send up its machines and its prepared foods, but who knows what unforeseen circumstances may cut off that fragile supply. The Inuit seem to have been able to integrate their traditions with the white man's materialism, and they will happily use outboard motors. But fishing for salmon and Arctic char is not a sport. It is a community effort to ensure the means of survival for all. The Inuit are as tough as the environment they live in. The technique of slicing filleted Arctic char with an ulu, an all-purpose knife, is an ancient one. The experience of 1,000 years is expressed in these easy-flowing movements. Their rhythmic repetition is an object lesson in the small details which make up the art of survival. It is a lesson which is intently studied by the younger generation, whose turn it will one day be to use the ulu themselves. Hung up to dry in the sun, the Arctic char are proud pennants proclaiming the independence of these sturdy people. The restless fluttering of the Arctic tern reminds us that it is time to move along. We still have a way to go. but not as long away as the tern, another migratory bird who will flee the northern winter by literally flying to the other end of the earth, the Antarctic to be exact. By the time it returns here next spring, it may well have flown 25,000 miles, a distance equal to the Earth's circumference. It's time to get back to Pond Inlet. Our scientists have now arrived, and the expedition team is ready to continue its journey to the fossil forest. The eastern part of the Arctic is rich in the history of exploration. It is also rich with the bones of those explorers who succumbed to its undying fascination. At first it was whaling that lured men to these treacherous waters with their inhospitable shores. The North Pole still continues to lure modern adventurers who use everything from motorcycles to ultralight aircraft. Above all, the far north attracts scientific expeditions like ours, here heading towards Resolute Bay. But now we know more about the dangers in store for the unwary explorer or scientist. For nothing lured men on more than the prospect of the Northwest Passage. As soon as it became apparent that Columbus had not discovered a direct western route to the fabled Indies, the desire to find a Northwest Passage grew into a passion. How else can one explain the tenacity with which the effort was pursued? Passion frequently leads to tragedy, and none more tragic than the fate of the Franklin expedition. In 1845, under the command of Sir John Franklin, 2 British Navy ships looking for the Northwest Passage were trapped in the winter ice. Summer breakups never came, and finally, after 2 barren years, the surviving 105 officers and men began the long trek south to Hudson Bay. Weakened by hunger and ill with scurvy, the men died one by one along the way. Not one of them survived. It is hard not to admire their heroism as we visit their lonely graves. But it is just as hard not to feel that perhaps they brought their misfortunes on themselves. Overly confident in their well-built ships and European ways, they failed to study and learn from the Inuit how to survive in this brutally hostile climate. The irony is that the Northwest Passage never did become a shortcut across the Western Hemisphere. Nothing daunted, we fly on ever further north. As the forbidding face of Ellesmere glides beneath our wings, we have time to ponder the question which has brought us this far. Could this area have once been a warm, primeval swamp? Our course is set for Eureka on Ellesmere Island, next to our destination, Axel Heiberg Island. From Eureka, an all-year weather station which has been here since 1947, our helicopter will transport us to the site of the fossil forest on Axel Heiberg Island. The site was discovered in 1986, and our expedition is one of the very few that have made intensive studies in an effort to understand its origins. But first we have to bring in supplies and erect shelter against fickle weather. Though generously funded, expeditions are expensive, and our stay cannot be as long as we would wish. The complaint of all the scientists who come here. The smoothing effects of erosion explain the undramatic view. The site is mainly composed of gravel and sandy hills. Wind and water erosion have exposed to the open the dark material visible here in layers which follow the contour of the hills. 23 layers have been discovered, showing that the area was certainly flooded over at different periods of time. Compressed and preserved by the stupendous pressure of the gravel, what we see now are the trunks and stumps extruded out through erosion.
Except that you may have to go up there in order to do it. From here, we don't have to go up there.
Right. One of the problems, too, was Steve had this incredibly high tripod, gave him a lot better vantage.
I guess we must be able to, eh?
The eroded, gravelly plain provides a habitat for the Arctic hare. Rearing up on its hind legs, it can keep a weather eye open for possible predators. Weighing as much as 12 pounds, these hares feed on Arctic willow, pawing out sprigs from under the snow. In summer, they like to nibble Arctic poppies.
Yeah. I wonder if we can see.
Calculating the rate of the erosion may help us date more precisely the age of the forest, which presently is thought to be around 40 million years old.
Roughly 40 million years old.
It seems hard to believe that these barren expanses were once covered with tropical forests. Yet the scientists examining the terrain and the remains of stumps crowded together here cannot help but arrive at that conclusion. These stumps were once giant megasequoia, a tree now only to be found in one area of China. Their growing so closely together means there must have been plenty of light and water once. In the stark outlines of this deep-rooted stump, we recognize a shape that should be familiar to those of us who have seen pictures of the Louisiana Bayou or the Florida Everglades. Water and light in abundance are clearly required for this kind of forest. Yet on Axel Heiberg Island, precipitation is so limited that it is officially classed as a desert. It's a sobering thought that forests like these in the Everglades could have flourished in the high Arctic some 40 million years ago and yet disappear as though they had never been. What happened then could happen perhaps several times over in planet Earth's future. In the geological time perspective, our present temperate era may prove to be no more than a blink of the eye of eternity. Yet life always seems to go on. Species die out and are replaced by others that adapt to new environments. This gentle landscape, which is all that erosion has left us of the once mighty forests, is blessed with a microclimate that has allowed musk oxen to survive here since the Ice Age. When faced with danger, they huddle together to present a formidable ring of sharp horns to wolves, their main predator. If there is something about a musk ox which makes it seem not all of one piece, that may be because it is related to both the genus Ovis, sheep, and the genus Bos, cattle, but belongs to neither and has its own classification. They survive by living in low-density herds and traveling far and wide in search of their daily diet of sedges and Arctic willow. Since our job is to measure and record the rate of natural erosion, we survey the terrain using two markers. The first marker, painted orange, is driven into the permafrost, where hopefully it won't move. The second marker, attached by a length of cord to the first, floats on the gravel and moves with the surface through its cycles of freezing and thawing. The astonishing feature of these forest remains is that after all these millions of years, they're still in an organic state. In other words, still very much like wood. In typical fossils, the enormous pressure that created them is accompanied by a process known as petrification, which turns an object into rock while preserving its original shape. The fossil forest remained in its woody state because it was waterlogged. The timber, eroded out onto the surface, has dried, warped, and cracked. These mute, contorted reminders of the Arctic's tropical past, when the land probably teemed with species now long extinct, also remind us that man is a very recent arrival on planet Earth. Perhaps we are a species in transition, either towards extinction or towards a new type of humanoid. To see a world in a grain of sand, said the poet William Blake. And here on Axel Heiberg Island, we hold its history in the palm of our hand. But to study that history, we need to conserve these fragile relics. Like the trees and branches, the forest floor was discovered intact, with the leaves of several species clearly preserved and seeds and cones scattered throughout. Preserving these poses a severe challenge. Exposed to the air, they remain visible for only a little more than an hour before drying out and disintegrating. Experiments are being made to coat the specimens in an ultra-thin coating of polymer-based plastic. If the experiments succeed, these ancient keys may unlock the secrets of the tropical Arctic's past and provide scientists with the opportunity for deeper laboratory study. But as we leave, we know the tropical forest of yesteryear is only one of the many mysteries held in the fastnesses of the high Arctic. We and others will return to probe, to measure, to understand how and perhaps why these vast silences came into being.
Another realm of